Those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Welcome to the Caregiver Reality Show, hosted by gerontologist and family caregiver expert David Levy, speaking on a topic that is not only a national problem, but an international one, and represents one of the biggest dilemmas facing us today: Alzheimer's disease and dementia. With no cure in sight and hundreds more being diagnosed weekly, Alzheimer's is more feared than cancer or heart disease. Join us as David Levy breaks it down and educates, informs, and explains useful caregiver strategies and techniques that 25 years of non-clinical family caregiving have taught him. You can listen or call in and be part of the show. 888-565-1470 to ask your questions. And now, here's David Levy.
Good evening, Boca Raton, Florida, and the world. This is the Caregiver Reality Show. I'm your host, David Levy, gerontologist, and I'm here tonight with my back this week as co-host Paul Vattiato, and with us is a very special guest, Karen Green. Karen's a nurse, a case manager, and she's also very involved in the Guardian Association. She is a Guardian, and she's also been recently nominated for the 2013 Nursing Distinction Award, which she was also nominated for in 2007. Did I get that right?
Yes, thank you.
All right. And we got a lot of things to cover tonight, and Paul and I first have our little discussion about men as caregivers, because we are they, as Pogo says. And, we're all about what we're all about, which is a little bit of science and some human interest, caregiver education, and respect for caregivers and the loved ones that they care for. You can reach us if you want to speak with us, 888-565-1470. We're on 1470 AM, that's WWWNN, in Boca Raton, Florida. Or if you don't have good reception and you're watching us on the internet at caregiverreality.com, but you don't want to look at our faces, you can get on iHeart, IHEART.com, click on Florida and go to WNN, and you can hear us over the internet while you do your Sudoku puzzle or surf for recipes. Anyway, Paul, Karen, good evening.
Hey, David.
So how was your weekend, Paul?
Hey, David.
Yeah, well, I know that story very well. And but as a caregiver, we all have to expect the unexpected. But before we get into discussing our personal caregiving, I must tell you the episode with Uncle Bob in Philadelphia, where my sister and I are the last two living relatives. And so he with his dementia, and my aunt at 92, who's deaf and blind and starting to become very demented, all of a sudden, he's been in rehab. Mm-hmm. And so over the weekend, he decided that he had chest pains, and nobody could tell whether it was real or not. So normally we ship him off to University Hospital, which is the hospital for the University of Pennsylvania, because that's where my aunt, who was a psychiatrist, worked out of for many, many years, and close to where they used to live in downtown Philly. Now that he's at the Watermark, all right, it's close to Hahnemann Hospital. So the EMTs took him to Hahnemann, and it was a comedy of errors. It wasn't that they didn't want to do good. They couldn't get his records. And so all night long, I'm getting phone calls, as is my sister, about what meds did he take. I said, were you even aware that he was in the hospital 2 weeks ago for a brain bleed? Oh, that's good to know, because we found a clot in his lung and we didn't know whether to start him on Coumadin. Well, you can start him on Coumadin, but he's probably going to start bleeding in the brain again. So my sister, who, along with myself, has durable power of attorney and advance directives, the doctor says to her, well, what do you want to do if he codes? Meaning, what happens if, if he's dead on the table, do we save him? Do you want us to do? I said, no. But my sister had said, well, call us. And I then, after my sister told me that, I said, Barbara, there's no time in the middle of a code to get a phone call to decide what you want to do. I said, I respect the fact that you're the financial whiz, because she's the chief financial officer of PBS, but I said, you're going to have to leave me as the chief financial officer of caregiving. So I called the doctor back and I said, if he codes, let him code. I said, because I don't want you to bring him back, God forbid we have a little more anoxia or not enough oxygen to the brain, or he has a further stroke involvement. I said, no. And so he said, oh, thank you, because that's what the team wanted to do.
Did they sign a do not resuscitate order?
In the Pennsylvania advance directive is a DNR, language, all right? It's not specifically a DNR, but I've rarely ever seen anybody reach for the DNR. Either they get them on the table in time or they know. But see, the difficulty that they had, nobody from the facility had sent the DPOA, the advance directive, so we faxed them in late at night and then played with the doctors throughout the weekend, bringing them up to date because they couldn't contact anybody at University Hospital that would let them know, not that they didn't want to, but, it's the system.
Wow.
They didn't send any records from the facility he was in? Okay.
No, because
that would have been helpful.
when the EMTs came, they just took him away. Mm-hmm. And he was in rehab in a completely different section than where he is in the ALF. Mm-hmm. And so the only thing they had was his rehab record, which really wasn't going to lend a whole heck of a lot to the background. They didn't even let them know that the reason he was in rehab was because he had a brain bleed 2.5 weeks ago. And the only reason that he didn't stroke out altogether, he's been on Coumadin. And so that probably stopped him from throwing the clot, but didn't stop the brain bleed. It enhanced it. So that was my caregiver weekend, notwithstanding all the other stuff that goes on.
So how is he now?
They returned him back today with all of the admonitions that, we're not trying to do any heroics. We have no idea because they wouldn't put him back on Coumadin for all the obviously right reasons. But I guess that means at any point in time, the one in his lung could break loose. He could throw another one. And so this is an event waiting to happen. In the meantime, we've got 24-hour care in the ALF for my aunt because she's so dependent on him. And so she's afraid to be alone. And so actually I was very lucky because last week when I was having all the problems, you weren't here when he went in, I couldn't get a straight answer out of anybody. So I called my good friend Linda Woodward, who works for Senior Bridge, and they got me a case manager in Philadelphia. And boy, was she I asked for the nastiest, meanest, will not take no for an answer. And she was terrific. She really got things straightened out and everybody marching in height order. So I was very, very pleased with that. But even when you know what you're doing and you write the book and everything else on it, when it's going on inside of your world, believe me, no matter how objective I can be with my uncle,
makes you crazy.
It makes you crazy. It really does. And but I mean, we're the last two living relatives, and so both he and my aunt are well along in age and well along in their own infirmities. So we got to call the shots and do what we think is right.
They're lucky to have
we
you.
have long-term care insurance. So we were very lucky about that. So how was your weekend, Paul?
A lot of caregiving.
Yeah.
A lot of caregiving. As I mentioned 2 weeks ago, Debbie had a fall, and when she hit the pavement, or blacktop,
right,
she injured her back, and fortunately nothing was broken, perhaps fractured, but it was the tailbone, so they really not much that they can do for it. And she had just been in a lot of agony for the last 2 weeks, and needs help getting up, needs help with sometimes not even be able to get to the table even to eat, so you bring food to her. A lot of struggling, and she's a lot of pain, and she also feels a lot of guilt because she fell, and it wasn't her fault, but she fell. And
so she knows it winds up on your watch as well as
on
everything.
my watch, and it's, I'm still, shopping and cooking and taking care of things.
Please, I've been doing that for so long. I mean, I have an implied apron. But that's what we do.
Yeah,
Husbands as caregivers.
it is.
All right.
And in between that, doing the things that need to get done around the house, just the normal things. And as you well know, we are technically living in Sebring, Florida, where we have a house.
Right.
But we haven't been able to go up there in weeks and weeks and weeks because Debbie can't do the car ride anymore. I can't really leave her for a weekend, and I have to go up there on occasion to check that, make sure the house is still
Right.
there. So it's been a struggle.
Well, you're going to have to make a decision about that one of these days.
It's not an easy decision to make.
No, I'm sure
It's a decision of what we wanted to do and what was right at the time versus the reality of what is now and what will probably be in the future.
Mhm. Well, I think that anyone dealing with caregiving, and yours is complicated between the lupus and some of the other things that are going on, just as mine is with dysautonomia and a lot of the other stuff, and Karen will certainly tell us some good stories in a few minutes. The best laid plans absolutely go upside down and on a regular basis. And so, one of the reasons that I wrote the book on family caregiving, practical problem solving, is because rather than tell you what to do, we try and explain to you a little bit of how to plan. Because if you don't at least understand, and I know I say this often, but if you don't understand what your options are, even if they're lousy options,
Right.
then when you have to make a decision, you don't know whether you made a good one or a bad one. And you at least should have the comfort as a caregiver of knowing that you did the best you could with what you had in front of you at this moment in time. Because you're going to have all kinds of caregiving situations, and at least it gives you kind of a line in the sand. All right, I have this, I don't have that, they have this, I can't rely on that. So at least it gives you a matrix. All right, and so at least you give it your best shot.
And situations change.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's the one thing we can count on is
Yeah.
change.
Could I ask you both, do you do anything for yourselves? Do you
Sure,
take
we
any
commiserate
downtime?
on the telephone.
Do you take any personal time for just a little bit of R&R?
That's something that I have been very negligent about. And,
it's a luxury that I wish I was able to do, but other responsibility besides caregiving. I mean, David and I both work full-time. We have responsibilities associated with that. It's really hard to find those extra few hours in the day or
whenever.
Really.
Right. And I'll tell you, I'm going to get back, Karen, to you in a moment about the full moon this past weekend. Caregiving came out of the walls this weekend. So when I wasn't dealing with my own or my uncle's, I was dealing with clients. And, I don't know whether it was the moon or just the circumstances, but all the support groups are filling up. I have more people coming to support groups than I've ever had before. I have more, as you do, referrals going on from people that are involved in, and I only really deal with complicated stuff because the easy stuff I kind of leave for everybody else, and there is more complications going on. And it isn't a question of Obamacare, because it really doesn't make a difference whose care it is. When you've got a loved one with dementia, a stroke, all right, and you're there alone, you're the family caregiver, and you don't know what to do, believe me, I know from my own experiences in 25 years of doing it, it's a scary place to be.
And it's not the full moon. It's just the reality that
Right.
as the population is aging, more and more of the negative side of aging is tending to come up. That's requiring more and more people to step into that role of unpaid family caregiver. And now we're needing more and more professionals to come in to assist, because in many cases it's beyond what we ourselves can do.
Right. And Karen, I'm going to give you a little opportunity now. I've known Karen now for a couple of years, and I use her because, as I said, I deal with complicated caregiving, and when it gets complicated, I call Karen.
We do complicated.
Right. And one of the reasons is because she's so good at working with people whose loved one will not leave the house and needs to be assessed within the house in order to get a psych evaluation to either pull off a Baker Act or get them into a psych facility.
Why don't you explain what a Baker Act is, David?
Oh. Well, Karen can probably do a better job than I, but the Baker Act is essentially an act here in Florida, and it's similar around the country, that says if a peace officer or a medical person sees somebody who is a danger to themselves or others and it's imminent, then they have the ability to, as a police officer, take them into the nearest medical facility or confinement area. We have South County Mental Health in Delray, where they can take them to an ER if they're a police officer, have them evaluated by either the doctor in charge or a psychiatrist or whoever else gets called in, and then have them committed for up to 72 hours. And there's a 3-person committee essentially that has to go in pretty quickly, and correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, and make an evaluation of just how much of a danger they are, because within 72 hours there will be, here in Florida, what's called a magistrate's hearing. And that magistrate will listen to the information being presented and make a determination based on the doctors and the other information that may be in front of him as to whether or not that person should be held over for further evaluation in a facility or however that may be done. Did I get a pretty good handle on it?
Absolutely. You did a great job.
All right.
So, Karen, in your experience, how often does a caregiver, a family caregiver, actually make that call to 911?
You know, it's a very difficult call because you have a lot of guilt, you have a lot of worry, you don't want to disappoint, you don't want to make a bad judgment call. I think that's the biggest issue, is when it needs to happen and people are reluctant to make the phone call because they're not sure if it's really bad enough to qualify. I think that's the biggest issue. And if you have that doubt, it's too late.
Right. And that's one of the reasons that Karen is so good, because we've managed at times to put her in the house as somebody's daughter, as a good friend in the neighborhood, and she can get that assessment under her belt. And then she works with some other great doctors in the area who trust her and her evaluation, so that we had one not too long ago, obviously no names, where we had a woman that did not see a doctor for 5 years and had a bunch of affectations that were driving her husband crazy. And so Karen went and did an evaluation. We were able to get the wife, in this case, to go into a local facility where they were able at least to balance her meds, and to the point where when she came out, we were able then to put her into a dementia facility. And the husband is still in my support group and walks around with a smile these days. His daughter was down just a couple of weeks ago. It is such a relief. He used to have to hide in the closet to call me because she wouldn't leave him alone, and she had to know everything that he was doing. But Karen was great. She got in there, she did her thing.
Thank you.
And but you know, Karen, you're very, very good at what you do. And besides the fact that it was a full moon, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you do, and tell us, hey, first of all, what's the name of your company?
The name of my company is Hired Hearts. I am the hireable heart. I am a nurse care manager. I'm also a professional guardian. And it's a labor of love.
Well, it has to be able to do it.
Yes.
How long have you been doing it?
I've been in business for 13 years now, and I'm very passionate about what I do. And I'm very dedicated to the point where it's hard to relinquish and turn over to other people who work with me. But I'm working on that because I have wonderful staff, and they're very supportive. And you know, I can't do it all. So
no,
they're terrific.
Do you find at times that being a guardian and a case manager is a conflict?
No, actually, they coincide. As a matter of fact, I'm working with a family now as a care manager, and it looks like we're going to need to move forward with a guardianship. And that's how I ended up moving forward with guardianship and taking the course and becoming a professional
and
guardian.
Obviously being very involved with the Guardianship Association.
I am. I'm the president of the Palm Beach County Guardianship Association, and I sit on the board for the state of Florida. And I'm also a nationally certified guardian. So I love what I do.
All right.
Karen, for those that may not know, can you elaborate as to what the role of a care manager is and when would be appropriate to call a care manager?
You know, there are different types of care managers, and I feel I am very effective by being a nurse care manager when there is a medically complex situation. It's very easy for us to understand it and navigate it and know what is coming next, as well as how we can maybe avoid some pitfalls, put some proper safety measures in place. It's very important to be proactive and not reactive. So I think as a nurse, we're able to do that. If you're overwhelmed and you're not sure how to coordinate care, if you're finding that you're getting no answers from your doctors and they're not doing it the way you want it done, that's a great time to call a care manager, because we advocate for the client, for you. You know, if you're good and you're above board, you work for that family only. So, you know, you're advocating for them, and if you don't like the way it's going, you can move to another physician. You can move to another facility. You can move to another hospital. A care manager will know how to navigate that to avoid the pitfalls and make sure that your needs and your voice is heard.
Well, and you do a great job of it, but now that we see that we have a lot of things in flux, we've got managed Medicaid that's slowly emerging. We have Obamacare that's underway. We're finding that Medicare Advantage programs, there are some big providers that are cutting back on their networks and making it extremely complicated for people to figure out what they want, how to enroll, and many times you can enroll in November and discover that January 1, your provider cut your favorite doctor off the panel.
I would say at this point, with the way the tides are changing, your best option, if it's affordable, is to go with Medicare with a secondary supplemental with your Part D. I know it's more expensive to do that, but that will offer you the most freedom of choice. Anywhere in the state, anywhere in the country, you can go to the doctors that are on your list. Any provider, any rehab, any hospital. If you're on one of the managed cares, you have to go through your gatekeepers and their providers, which are much more limited.
Right. My wife and I were going through that exercise a week or two ago because one of my neighbors said, "Oh, I can go to anybody," and she happens to be in one of the managed care programs. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Well, if you can go to anybody, how come you have to keep going back to your primary, who doesn't like to give out those referrals?"
Exactly.
And I said, "You're just lucky that you haven't had a major medical crisis, but between my wife and myself, if we had to wait and go through gatekeepers or primary care physicians, but
that would make your job as a caregiver exponentially more difficult."
I have been fee-for-service Medicare, and because my wife worked for the hospital district, they became our secondary and Plan D, and little dental and vision. But
well, you have about 2 weeks left for open enrollment. Anyone who's listening, please take advantage of it, because this is your time or you'll be locked in for a whole nother year.
Right, unless you find a 5-star provider, and then you can move in the middle. And what I'm talking about is that Medicare rates these managed care programs. And while none of them, I think there's one in Miami that's 5-star. But if you find a 5-star program and you want to make a switch from your Advantage program to a 5-star, they do allow you to do that at any point. But we don't have a 5-star provider yet in Broward or Palm Beach County.
I will tell you this, another provision is if you are in your home and you move to an assisted living, when you go into the assisted living, you can make a change that following month.
And it's the same thing also when you go in a nursing home, isn't it? That when you go in the nursing home, if you were in managed care, they want you on Medicare. Usually. Yes. All right. You're just about there, aren't you, Paul?
Go kicking and screaming. That's all I have to say.
Well, I know I am on Medicare. I qualify this year, and my struggle has been trying to get onto the supplemental policy. Mm-hmm. And used to be you could pick up a telephone, dial a number, and there would be a human being on the other side that you could find out what's going on.
Right.
That doesn't exist anymore. Everything now is menus and recordings, and it's impossible to find out where your application is, what is going on. And again, as an advocate, knowing something about what I'm doing, I'm pulling my hair out just trying to find out if I'm covered.
Right. And you have the situation where you're on Medicare and your wife isn't ready for Medicare
No,
yet.
she does qualify now because she's been on disability.
Okay,
Wonderful.
she's SSDI. That's good.
Yeah, so
All right. I mean,
she's
it's not good that she was on SSDI, but
yeah.
that's Social Security disability for anyone
Right.
that wanted to know. If you've got a question for Karen, for Paul, and myself, we're here at 888-565-1470, and we'd be happy to take your call. We're on caregiverreality.com. Just click on live show. If you're there and you have a question, post it. We'll be happy to answer it. If not tonight, we'll get to it during the week and be happy to give you an answer. And obviously, as I said, you can listen on iHeart.com. So we have a whole bunch of ways to hear about us.
Exactly. Karen, a question for you, if I may.
Sure.
Many of the adult children who have parents that are obviously in need, how do they go about making the decision of who to call? If they
My
didn't-
referral sources are typically through attorneys and doctors. I do have a website, so you can Google search. Most people don't know that care management exists, so it's usually recommended through another professional. And it's a great way to, if you ask questions, somebody in your circle of people should be able to tell you case management.
Right.
So you do things like go to doctor's visits
I
if
do.
the adult children are not able to do that, pick up medications if that's necessary.
We do medication box refills. We can help manage all of your doctor's appointments, keep everything straight, arrange for transportation, arrange for private duty aides. We determine how many hours are appropriate. Doesn't mean you have to have somebody live in your home unless that really is the right fit for you. We can also assist with placement, transitioning people from their home into the most appropriate facility, and help again with the caregiving family, making sure that there's a referral to the proper support services.
And how do you report back to the family?
Typically by phone or email. I'm on the road a lot. My office is my car, so I prefer to pick up a phone and say, this is what's going on. And certainly I'm available. I keep my phone with me at all times, so I am always available and happy to help anytime.
Paul, I think it's time for us to give up being caregivers. We put Karen in charge. We'll take the place in Sebring.
I would be happy to. Even just for a respite, a fill-in, I'm happy to help.
Respite? What's that?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
You guys can go play a little.
All right.
I think that's Tuesday between 4 and 4:30.
Okay. Well, I see that we're getting close to our station break. And so why don't we take that now? We come back. There will be more interesting stories from Karen, caregiver stories from Paul and myself. I do have a Dr. Hilfiker blog. This is his first one since discovering he has all the symptoms of cognitive impairment, but was told he didn't have Alzheimer's. And now he's trying to figure out who he is and what to do. So that'll be part of the next half hour. Please stay tuned. 1470 AM, caregiverreality.com, and call us at 888-565-1470 if you have a question.
Talk 1470, WWNN Pompano Beach, WKIS HD3, Boca Raton, Miami, Fort Lauderdale.
Hello, are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse, parent, or loved one who can no longer care for themselves? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Are you stressed, burned out, frustrated, and don't know where to turn? Have you realized that your doctor, lawyer, and mental health professionals don't have real practical answers? You need a non-clinical family caregiver expert that the professionals turn to. You need David Levy. He is a family caregiver expert with 25 years of active experience with thousands of family caregivers. He can help you provide a better quality of life for you and your loved one. Contact David Levy at dlevy@caregivered.org. That's dlevy@caregivered.org. Or call 561-482-0086. And let's get your mental road to healing started.
Dancing with the Stars.
We're back, and Boca America in the world. This is caregiverreality.com. I'm here with Karen Green, nurse, case manager, guardian, and I just heard of, while we took the break, participant in ballroom dancing, and I think that's great. But everybody needs a little R&R. Paul, what do you think? Should we take up ballroom dance?
I don't think I'm a ballroom dancer.
I just got new orthotics, so maybe I'll be lighter on my
The
feet.
bigger question is who would lead.
Right, who would lead? Right, that is a good question. Before we get back, I just wanted to make mention of the fact this week, as if we didn't have enough complications in dealing with Alzheimer's. And everybody's kind of aware that the big Alzheimer's gene is the one called ApoE, or ApoE4. Not that all those letters and numbers mean anything, but it does to neurologists like Mark Brody and others that deal in this world. But they reported this week that they have discovered 11 new genes, 3 of which are associated not only with Alzheimer's, but also with Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis. The other 8, for which they have just put alphabet soup up against it, they didn't know existed. So if we thought that the hunt was easy, all right, just looking at the ApoE gene, or something else that we really had our hands around, now we have another 8 to 11. And I think the interesting thing about the genetic aspect of all of this is the fact that those first 3 are so closely aligned, at least in the beginning, for MS, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. They all seem to travel down that same path before they split into the individual disease. We know they're all a product of degenerative brain disease. There are autoimmune issues attached to it, and the genomics that are going on, the Alzheimer's gene study that's been underway. While it's great to be able to map all this stuff out, the more they map, the more they find. So that only complicates the issues for a lot of the researchers. If I bump into this again, I'm going to wind up breaking it. But the point is that we're investigating, and the thing is that we're also very complicated in terms of what we're discovering and how best to use it. So, people are going to have to really stay tuned, because it may turn out that while we understand things like the beta amyloid and the blocking that does, and the tangles that come from tau, which is another neurochemical, that all this genetics may wind up really being part of the secret of whether or not we can slow the onset down, because I think that's going to be one of the things that will give people a better quality of life. I don't think we're going to reverse it or find a cure very soon, but if we can slow it down, because we know it starts 15, 20 years before we see it, that's going to be the place.
I think also, David, it's so important for those families that are going through Alzheimer's to participate in some of these studies that are going on, because it's only when we have these investigational studies are we actually going to be able to get some answers that hopefully will slow it down.
Right. You can't do human studies without humans. As I've said before, and I'll repeat again, trite as it may be, we're creating a generation of mice and glowworms that will have no cognitive impairment. All right, but we're not getting there with it with humans, and especially if we have to start earlier. And that's going to be the big issue. At 40 or 45, are you willing to participate in a program where they have to deal indirectly? Because you may not have ostensibly a lot of outward signs, but yet now they've got to go. Maybe some of the medicines that haven't worked, that all went upside down in the last year and a half, may work if you started 10 or 12 years earlier, but you got to raise your hand and be willing as a boomer.
And,
right,
in addition to that, regarding the Obamacare, I think that the only, the nice benefit at this point would be that they would eliminate all the pre-existing.
Yes.
So if there is one ray of sunshine here, that might be it.
Right. But, I wonder, and I agree with you, Karen, and Paul, you're spot on. But I see in this last couple weeks they came out with a new cancer med, which was great.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's $120,000 a year, and there are very few insurance companies that are going to wind up very soon paying for it. And my fear is that even though there's a huge millions and millions of people that have Alzheimer's and dementia, that if we get one of these blockbuster drugs, that they're going to look to recoup the billions that they've got invested in research, and it may put it out of the hands of the folks. Not that there aren't wealthy people that have dementia, but it may put it outside the ability of the masses to be able to benefit if we get to some breakthrough technology.
Well, I mean, we're coming into a world more and more of generic medications, and the willingness of the insurers to pay for some of these newer branded drugs getting harder and harder to get approved.
Right. And you'll see now, even a lot of the drugstores, if you've got branded drugs, they'll literally let you have it for nothing. It's a great loss leader for something that costs them $2 a prescription to get you in the store, and hopefully you buy something that has a profit factor in it.
Absolutely.
And that makes a big difference. Karen, you're out there all the time. What big changes do you see that are underway or that are happening in your world? I realize it's a little bit of a loaded question. Yes, we have Obamacare, but looking at it from the perspective as a case manager and also from guardianship perspective, what changes are coming about that are going to make it either easier or more difficult for people to manage their care?
Medicare is now moving towards a more managed care system themselves. So they want your primary care doctor to be more of a gatekeeper, referred to their people, their circle of people that they use and trust. And they're also bonusing the doctors on keeping you home longer. So it is becoming a more home-based program. They're trying to eliminate people running to facilities, especially skilled nursing facilities where the costs are,
astronomical.
$8,000 a month on an average.
Right.
So, that's definitely the push. And doctors are expecting people to manage their own health care. I know that both of you are caregivers to your wives. If there were no husbands, if they were left to manage their own health care, would they be able to navigate it?
I have you in the will.
Okay, great.
That's two wills you're in.
Right. Right after they get my ashes, it says, call Karen.
It's very difficult when you have people that have any kind of cognitive impairment. I mean, just managing when a patient is discharged from a hospital and they're given 5 prescriptions and 6 doctors they need to follow up with, and durable medical equipment that they need to have delivered and brought into the house, it's just overwhelming. You want to just take it and put it in a drawer and say, you know what, I'll deal with it later. And then they end up right back in the hospital, especially if they have a diagnosis of congestive heart failure, where if they're not being monitored and they're not tweaking their medication properly, maybe they need to get on a scale every day and check their weights or blood pressure checks.
What do you think about some of this remote technology? Do you see that as being a benefit, or do you see it being not having real eyes and ears and training versus what may be just a set of sensors? What's your feeling on that?
That is also a blessing and a detriment. You have wonderful technology. Hopefully it's being utilized properly, the benefit. Then you have the reporting system. Who's it being reported to, and who is doing something with that information? So that's the big question. Are there doctors monitoring that? Who are they going to contact if something seems inappropriate or off?
Well, that's a very good point.
The whole thing is, it's based upon assumptions. Everyone makes an assumption that someone else is doing it, and the reality of it is, the sidewalk is filled with cracks that these issues
fall
into.
One of those assumptions, and Karen, I don't mean to cut you off, but one of the assumptions is, because you raised a very good point, is that all this care is going home.
Yes.
I often speak here on the air about the fact that there's approximately 1,000,006 nursing home beds, about 1,000,000 hospital beds, and maybe 2,000,008 assisted living, of which most are independent before they are assisted. And if you just took the dementia population, before we added in temporal frontal lobe dementia.
Or vascular.
Or vascular, or any of the others, that we could maybe put a third of the population that needed it just from the dementia perspective into every bed, and that would leave no room for anything else. So the problem that I've always encountered is, if you're going home, who's training the caregiver?
Absolutely.
Now, not everybody can afford a Karen Green or even has a Karen Green available. When we stop to think about what goes on in the rural areas of this country, to be able to pick up the telephone and have somebody like yourself available. But what happens when you live in Podunk?
Exactly.
And all you have is one rural hospital that's an hour and a half drive away, and a home health care agency is something fondly to be wished, but not there, let alone a case manager.
And that's the benefit of living in Florida. I mean, we certainly service the population, and there are abundant hospitals and facilities and services that are not available to everyone else in the country.
Right, and even we see the soft white underbelly of where it falls astray.
Right.
You know, and not being able to communicate with the doctors, getting shorthanded at the hospital because you may not show up with the right paperwork, and you're dealing with a hospitalist because Marcus Welby died, and you don't know anybody, or you're not in a hospital where you're known, and all of a sudden it's you against the system.
Right.
And it's not very friendly. You may find out what's wrong with your loved one, but after that, I mean, most people don't understand that from the moment you get there to the hospital, there's a discharge planner sitting somewhere trying to figure out, how fast can I get you out the door? Do I have to admit you, or can I leave you under observation?
Observation, that's right.
Yeah. And there's one of the big issues, and we've discussed that on this show, that you need to constantly pester the folks in charge to find out, have I been admitted? Has my loved one been admitted? Because observation leaves you without the ability to go on to extended care in a skilled nursing facility, for argument's sake, for physical therapy or
Correct.
what have you, as well as the fact that you might wind up with part of the bill because you never got admitted, and Medicare only paid for your doctor and your medicine, and you never got admitted, so who's paying for the room and the board?
Exactly.
And I know people that have gone up to the floor and never been admitted and wound up getting a heck of a bill after the fact. So, I mean, these are things that everybody needs to be aware of, whether you're a caregiver or whether you're just a normal healthcare consumer, because times they are a-changing, and
Absolutely.
and it's not an easy system to stay up with. I give you a lot of credit because you're like Paul and myself. You get up every morning and you go and you read the internet and everything else. What changed last night while I was sleeping?
Well, over and above navigating the medical side of it, navigating the insurance side of it, particularly when you're not in a Medicare situation where it may be long-term care insurance, that whole world is changing. So as a family caregiver, having to deal with the patient, a loved one, having to deal with the medical side of it, and having to deal with the third leg of the stool, the insurance company.
Absolutely.
It's a full-time job.
Yes. I mean, trying to get a referral from the physician and putting it through and having all the pieces of the puzzle fit together, it is a full-time job in itself. You go out for a diagnostic testing. Well, did you get this referral? And is it at this center? Maybe it's not at this center. Maybe it's at the center across the street and down the block and around the corner that you didn't know about.
And they don't tell you were supposed to bring a check for $150 copay when you show up.
Right. And there's no billing you later.
No. Billing you later is fondly to be wished. The only one that'll bill you later is PayPal. And so, no, the system, you really have to understand the rules and the regs, and they're constantly changing.
And a lot of the physicians are opting to retire. So that's a whole nother strain on the system, as are
nurses that have been the backbone of an awful lot. I mean, I respect the fact that it appears that nurse practitioners and physician assistant nurses are the front line for geriatric care. And they're manning the mini clinics. They're doing the front line. And the caregiver is the backbone of the system.
And speaking of backbones, many of the nurses are retiring because of back injuries, of the work that they've had to do.
And
there's no one in the schools teaching nursing. I mean,
right.
there's a
Well,
shortage
you
of
know,
trainers.
for a while ago, we had too many nurses, so they shut down a lot of the nursing schools. Now they're trying to get them back, but it's hard to find good, competent teachers because a lot of them either went back to private practice or retired altogether. And now they're doing more online teaching. And Karen, you can tell us as a nurse, there is no substitute for a warm body to teach you and a warm body to learn on.
You know, my daughter just graduated high school and she's in college now trying to figure out what path she will take. And it is going towards more virtual reality learning. And I don't know about you both, but I need hands-on. I need to visualize it. I need to see it. I need to be a part of it. I need to have discussion. And you really don't get that. And it's scary.
And my niece, who is now a cardiothoracic surgeon and doing a year at Columbia University as part of the transplant team.
Wow.
Said that the kids that are in medical school right now are learning by avatars. All right, you know, you get a virtual program, you follow your patient as an avatar from birth through dementia.
Oh my goodness.
And death. But you don't. And so you have to be able to prescribe, interact, make recommendations, deal with family, etc. But you never, under this system, get to do it as a human being. So you're learning it out of a book and you're feeding it back to a computer, and you're watching a little avatar representation of that patient go through the motions of being your patient.
And the one problem with that is that you're not dealing with the personality, because on top of their physical stuff, you still have a personality that you have to deal with, and family dynamics. And,
oh, please!
You know, that's a whole nother world.
You know, as an elder care mediator, and I've taken family conflicts and all kinds of things. The one thing that you know when you get involved with a caregiver and with the patient is that there is historical luggage that will never move out of the emotional closet.
And can I just put out there to anyone who's listening, I am not fixing 60 years of bad family dynamics in a month. It's just not going to happen.
Well, my standard line for that is, and Paul's heard it ad nauseum, is, you know, when we sit down and we're dealing with something in the moment and the daughter goes, "Mom, I can't deal with her. She didn't let me go to the prom with Freddie." So like you said, there's a 50-year-old piece of Samsonite luggage that's epoxied into the closet. That one ain't moving. All right. And sibling rivalry from the sandbox forward.
Yes.
Wow.
And two marriages, couple of sets of kids.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh,
not
gosh.
my mom.
Not my mom, not my problem.
And it's my dad's money, not her money. Oh, that creates a whole nother conversation.
And then when they pass away, whoever you were, other woman, for 25 years, out. This is our house. Well, you know, I had that circumstance. You know that, Paul, that when my dad got real sick, he was married to the Wicked Witch of the West the second time around. They were married 25 years, and she called me up one day and she said, "This isn't what I bargained for." And I said, "What?" I said, "You've been married for 25 years. I know, but I didn't bargain for this." So I said, "Does that mean you're giving them back?" And she said yes. So I ran down from Boca to the Jerry Psych unit at Mount Sinai, packed him up, took him back, didn't speak to her again. Took 2 days after he passed away for my sister to tell her that he died.
Wow.
But I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you run into, and it's just amazing. And that is true family dynamics. And then the battle from Miss I'll give him back was her whole family wanted his money. And, you know, it wasn't that he was a very wealthy guy, but, you know, there were some people that really took very good care of him, called his daughter and his son. And there was a nest of snakes that came out of the woodwork with an attorney.
I see a whole new show popping up next week.
And the guy was Captain Evil in a black suit. All right, and you know, I run into it all the time, but I've lived it, and so I know that it happens, and it happens all too frequently. And in this world of care, especially as it gets complicated, and you have to drag in people that haven't dealt with it or don't want to deal with it, it's a problem.
And another sticky spot is that person who is mild to moderately demented, who becomes a little paranoid, and they're running from attorney to attorney saying, my family's trying to take this away from me. That's a huge problem. You have to be very cautious in how you handle that person.
And I would imagine also as a guardian, that's also a very tricky situation. While you're a professional guardian, all right,
Absolutely.
all right, and you have an attorney backing you up, you still are acting, even though you've got the right to take over on behalf of the client or the ward. You still got a whole family back there that's also questioning what your motives are while the clock runs.
Well, actually, I was in that situation. I had a family. I was working with the mother as a court-appointed care manager because there were so many dynamics going on. No one would get on the right page to help mom. So the one son and then the two sons on the other side, if one son said something, the other two were against it. And we went on like that for quite a while until I petitioned the court for guardianship. So I became guardian of the person. And after that, it's better, but it's still difficult. If I go along with one of the children, the other one thinks that I'm not listening to them.
So they run to their attorney and
Yes.
show up back in court,
Yes,
questioning
exactly.
whether or not you are neutral.
What my motivations
are,
are. Yes.
Karen, differentiate if you would. You said a guardianship of the person. What other types of guardianship are there that people should know about?
There are a guardianship of the person, guardian of the property, or a plenary guardian, which is a guardian for both. And the guardianship supersedes all powers of attorney and healthcare surrogates. So you are the ultimate decision maker. You are not allowed to do any transplants or any real aggressive treatments without the authorization by the judge. So the judge really is the ultimate.
So the judge is
Be
both
all,
the
end
durable
all.
power of attorney and the advanced directives. Huh?
Yes. And, if one of your wards passes, that's what we call them, a ward,
Right.
You cannot have a cremation unless you have any family member sign off on it, because there is no getting that back. I
Right.
mean, once you make that decision, it's done. So there are a lot of layers as a professional guardian that we have to
Yeah, I would
go
imagine
through.
one of the
Especially financially. I
Right.
mean, the state of Florida, and I am proud to say, we are the leaders in guardianship, probably because we have so much exposure to it. But we are the leaders in standards and practices. And there is a lot of supervision and a lot of oversight. So the stories that you hear are typically through family members
their
that are
interpretation than the reality.
well, and also the family members that are placed as guardians, because they just don't have the experience in the background. They don't know what's expected of them. And ultimately, they usually think that the money that should be theirs later when mom or dad passes is theirs now.
And I would imagine, just as I've laid it out inside of this practical problem-solving manual, when you're a caregiver and, some people forget about things like, you really ought to get pre-need funeral out of the way, because there's nothing more expensive or more of a Chinese fire drill than an at-need funeral. And
The emotional strain.
exactly, and if you don't have a checklist of things, because all of a sudden you think everything's running smoothly, bam, somebody has a stroke and they pass away, have a heart attack, you don't know what's coming, get hit by a bus. And, and so there are so many factors, and as a guardian, not only do you have all those factors to consider, but you have to be like Caesar's wife, above reproach.
Absolutely.
And report to the court.
Right.
Yes, everything has to be documented and approved by the court before you make that decision. I would definitely advocate for people to get their documents in place, set up your healthcare surrogates, make sure you have people that know what you want, your wishes. It's so important.
I hear so many people say, well, I've covered that in the will. I said, but you're not dead.
No.
And so what difference does it make if you covered it in the will? It's not that anybody's going to read it until you're dead. But what happens if you haven't said, please don't use, aggressive methods to keep me alive after I've had a bad stroke, or I've got a degenerative brain disease, and the medical profession, because they don't want to get sued, are doing everything possible
And you also have
prevent
family
liability.
guilt, where the family member wants
you're
to keep
killing
you
daddy?
alive.
Yeah.
Yes, that too. And, the wife that says, I just can't do that to him. He needs to stay alive for whatever reason, or the vice versa, the husband, I just can't do that to her. It's difficult.
Right. Well, we got about 3 minutes left. And, well, Paul, we had a whole bunch of things that we were going to get into, but Karen, it has absolutely been fascinating to have you with us.
Thank you. It's
tonight.
been my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
Karen, do you have one last thought for people who are going through this right now with a loved one? You talked about a full moon before we came in, and people are really struggling. What advice?
Besides picking up the phone and call you, and I want you to repeat your phone number.
Thank you. There will be good days and there will be bad days, and no path is a straight path. Be prepared for changes, because things happen, and plan ahead. Take some time for yourself. Bring in support services in any way, shape, or form. And my phone number is 561-432-7800.
All right. And we were listening to your tale of woe earlier about trying to get new appliances and equipment in your kitchen. So
I need my own case manager.
right. Karen is going to have to farm herself out for Thanksgiving, so that anybody that wants to take in a case manager, maybe you can trade a turkey leg for a little bit of advice.
Absolutely.
All right. Paul, I know it's been another one of those tough weeks, as it has been for all of us spousal caregivers. But I want to thank you for being here as always, and for sharing. And for Debbie, who's listening out there, we're sending them home in a few minutes. And to Suzette, I didn't talk about you tonight, dear. And so next week, you really have to worry.
We're going to have to bring the wives on
Oh, yes.
1 week.
All right.
Let
Freddie, are we
them
allowed
hear
to
their
do
side
that?
of the story.
Can we bring the wives in? Freddie's giving us the thumbs up. Little does he know.
Yes.
All right. 2 caregivers with 2 care recipients, all right, both of whom are married to. So you have no idea, Freddie, none whatsoever. But no, I think they have a lot of very interesting things to say. They've
their
been very
perspective.
supportive of us talking about them a little bit on the show. And so we will keep on talking about men as caregivers, because we are they. And so Boca Raton, America and the world, this has been the Caregiver Reality Show. We hope we brought you an interesting show. Certainly, Karen, thank you again.
It's been my pleasure.
This is David Levy, your gerontologist host, and we'll be seeing you again next week. And if you didn't catch all of this, it'll be posted by morning either on YouTube or at caregiverreality.com. And so go and see us if you didn't get the chance, if you were just listening on the radio. And you have to go see Karen. She's a beautiful woman.
Oh, thank you.
And she's now off for ballroom dancing. So thank you again, and we'll see you next week.
You have been listening and watching David Levy, gerontologist and non-clinical family caregiving expert. Visit our website at caregiverreality.com and hear and see unscripted family caregiver support groups discussing all of the questions that you have wanted to ask but didn't know where to turn. Tune in again next time for more updates and special guests who bring their caregiving experience to you so that you can deal with your problems and hear how family caregiving is affecting fellow Americans just like you. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its host, guests,